Hi, and welcome to Flute Topics, my program about everything covering flutes. I'm Helen of Helen's Willow Wind, and along with my parrot lady, we are thrilled to have my friend and mentor, Terry Mack from Canada with us. How are you, Terry?
I am wonderful and just absolutely thrilled to be here as well.
I'm wondering how we're ever going to keep a conversation short between the two of us, though, you know?
We've never been able to do that so far, so we'll try.
Good luck to us. But Terry, I know your backstory and I absolutely love it and I honor your husband for it. Could you sort of walk us through that and how the food affected you when you first came to it?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. The one part that you didn't know is that I'd always been drawn to flutes, and I would buy them and collect little junky flutes from the exhibitions, and I'd have them all over my house, and I'd look at them. I wouldn't do anything about them. So we moved from Edmonton to Vancouver Island and had some of my kids' recorders or penny whistles or whatever, and we were sitting in the living room and watching Stargate. I like Stargate, and I picked up the one of the penny whistler recorder, and I just played the theme song to the song Stargate, just played it. And Garland, my husband, looked at me and said, "How did you do that?" And I said, "Well, I have no idea. It just made sense to me." Like I could hear it. And so he said to himself, "This girl needs flute." So he decided that he was going to buy me flutes. So the first flute that he got me was a shakuhachi, which is really hard to play. And then he got me a Chinese zhao, which was a 4 foot tall flute. I have it here with
And
all kinds of
how tall are you, Terry?
5 feet. So he got me that flute. I tried that one. I didn't understand that. So I said to him, "I know you're going to get me a flute. I've always wanted a Native American style flute from the first time I heard them, and it was probably R. Carlos Nakai playing something." So I said, "If you can afford one for your, with your budget, I would like one for Christmas." So this started with my birthday in February, and this ended up at Christmas, and this was 2005. So he bought one. He found one from a Vancouver an interior BC maker, brought it into the house. He had a dream about playing it. It's like, no, 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 you can't do anything until, Terry opens you up on Christmas Day and plays you. And so he got me this flute, and it's a magical little flute. I love it. And then he started to play the flute. He facilitating me playing the flute also facilitated him playing the flute, because he always had visions of a recorder playing, sitting at the ocean and playing. But the flutes are so much more intuitive and easier for people to connect to. So that's how I got into it. Then from there, he got me another one for my birthday. So a year had gone by, and he said, "We should sell these things." And I said, "You're nuts." And so 4 months later, I had my business, Peaceful Spirit Flutes, and I've sold about over 1,500 flutes since then.
I love your husband. He is cool. That is
Yeah.
really And does he still play with you now?
Not so much. He's picked up a dulcimer, and he's trying to learn a dulcimer so that we can play together a little bit. But he does his own thing and I do my thing. So he loves his flutes. He plays them once in a while, and we do play together, and he does help me sell them. We do markets together, but
Isn't that fun? And I think everybody here knows Jim and I do markets and shows a lot too. And it really is fun doing it together and playing the flutes back and forth and the other things that we do. It's a wonderful lifestyle. And it's nice.
it sure is. We have had an absolute blast. We've done Renaissance fairs, and there was there was one Renaissance fair where there was an actual play. They had staged a play all in their Renaissance costumes, and they would do different scenes throughout the whole days that you were there. And so they were in front of our booth having one where the queen was being kidnapped or something. And so I pulled out my flute and played God Save the Queen, and they all just cracked up. It was really funny.
It is fun to play with our flutes as well as play them.
Yeah, that's how you learn. I will share with people just about a journey with the flutes. It's an instrument of exploration, and if you approach it from the perspective of, "I've got to play this note and I've got to play that note, and oh, this sound is wrong," you're going to get stuck. It's going to be much harder for you to learn. Where if you approach playing the flute from the position of joyful exploration, and let's look at every possible sound that you can make. I will start my classes, like group classes or individual classes, with people yelling into their flute. Make as much awful noise as you can, because you have to understand that you're not going to do everything right all of the time. And you need to understand how your breath and your fingering and not sealing holes and blowing too hard, how all of those things are going to affect your playing. And when you do that, and you've gotten over the fact that these things are going to happen, then when they do happen, you can go, how did I do that?
Yeah.
Which, you know, what we've talked about, how did I do that? How did that note happen? Because I love that. So how can I get that again? So those are some of the things that help you on your journey. And that's like, I taught myself to play. Nobody taught me a thing. I had the bad musical education experience as a kid with the old piano teacher, you know, with the gray suit and the gnarled fingers and the comb over hair. And I had to walk down the stairs to go to the piano lesson room and sit on the piano bench. I was 7 years old and look at this old man telling me to read the music. And I would look at the music and go, I can hear what he's doing. I can see what he's doing. I would play it. So after about 3 years, he said, you can't do that. Like, you can't play. I kept saying it all along. You can't play like that. So I said, well, this sucks. I'm not doing this. I went and bargained with my parents to get out of music and take swimming. So I never thought I would ever have a connection to music. And the flute set it free.
It did set it free.
It did. It did.
And you're so right. You know, get people over the fact that they're going to squeak and this, that, and the other, because they're going to. And, you know, people react either by recoiling when they do it, or, you know, they blow even harder and get in a fight with the flute, which drives me crazy. And by turning it into some kind of get it out of the way and then dive into the flute and see what else happens, it's all uphill from there.
It is, because you have to understand the principles of how the flute makes sound. And, you know, my journey was always just exploring the flute, like, wow, this is fun. I can do this. This is neat. Now, you start out with that basic pentatonic minor scale because it's so simple. And, you know, this is me, terrified person about music theory and all of this stuff that goes on that people learn. And like, you have to know the circle of fifths and you have to know that this, I don't know any of that. I intuitively understand the sound. But it was interesting because one of my shows that I was doing and selling the flutes was at the BC Music Teachers Convention. So, you know, talk about being terrified. All these music teachers around, and I'm playing the flutes, and I am at that point. We'd only been doing it for about 9 or 10 months, and so I'm still hadn't moved much beyond the basic pentatonic minor scale. So I'm playing everything in that, and it still sounds absolutely fabulous. But musically educated people hear beyond that. And so one person came up to me and said, "Can you play outside that basic pentatonic minor scale?" And I said, "Yes." And I did a couple of things, but another one, you know, but they said, okay, good, because they wanted to know what could the flute do. So the flute can do more than the basic pentatonic minor scale as you get accustomed to how the sounds fit with your fingering. But another lady came up and she was across from me. She had a booth and she was, I don't know what she was anyway. She had something to do with music. And she came up to me at the end and she said, I need to buy one of those for my grandson. Can you play Mary Had a Little Lamb for me? I want to hear Mary Had a Little Lamb. Well, I had no idea how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb. So I picked it up and went and played Mary Had a Little Lamb because it's just there. I have this gift. And she looked at me and she said, do you know what notes you're playing? And I said, no, I have no idea. But did it sound like Mary Had a Little Lamb? And she said, yeah. And I said, that's good enough for me. So, I go to a lot of flute circles and I listen, like Zoom in particular this year with COVID changing everything. There's been a lot more connections with Zoom and flute circles. And everybody is talking about, I need to play this fourth and this sixth and what does this work? And I'm probably never going to get there because I just personally don't care about that. I'll put some music on and I'll fool around and find the flute I like. But if I have to have that technical knowledge and I sort through that, I'm not playing. I'll put the flute down. But if I can just sit there and listen, pick up the flute and explore around with it and play with it, I have fun. And even reading tablature, I'll get it and go, okay, it gets in my way because then I have to follow it. And I'm like, I can't follow this. But everybody has their strength in playing. And one of my strengths is the fact that I can hear so much and I can feel and find it on the flute within the limitations of the flute. But if I can give any of your players any tips about playing, it is to pick up that flute and explore every note with every breath level and every slide. Like, you take your flute, we're not going to play because of, Zoom sound, but you take your finger hole, okay, and you move it minutely with your various breaths all the way along, Okay, and you are going to get different sounds, and you can tongue it, and you can blow soft, and you can blow hard as you can. And that's how you start to understand the principle of creating the various wonderful rises and falls. I call it sculpting and shaping sound. And so you really think of rising and falling with the sound. So you can take a note up, just bring it up, and then just let it hang for that split second, and then drop into another note, and you get this beautiful, beautiful feeling from it. And so those are techniques that you learn from playing around and practicing with them, and not yelling into your flute. Like, people will blow head on into the flute all of the time, always the same force of breath, always the no variation, no pausing, and you still get some nice sounding things, because it's almost impossible to make a flute sound awful, but they sound nicer when you start to allow the breath and the fingering and your good intention to shape the sound. And you can play fast, you can play slow, you can play blues, you can play classical. I play Middle Eastern scales on my flutes. I play Celtic sounds on my flutes.
I love your Celtic. Yeah, I'm a fan of that. Now, what would you suggest for people? Because a lot of us, and I'll include myself in this, we pick up our flute, we start playing, and we're going along, and we just don't put in the pause. We just go note for note for note all over the place. What's a good one for that? Because everybody starts there. They just want to hear it.
That's true. But let me think about that. I almost need the flute in my hand to get that, to figure that out, like to explain it. But think of when you're talking. If I talk in a monotone and I don't take a breath and I just keep going and talking and talking and talking and talking and talking and talking, it all sounds the same. It's never going to have any variation. But if I stop and I take that momentary pause, then I have some impact. So you're looking for those spaces, little minute, tenth of a second, sometimes even less, just to create tension. Like, you're creating tension that allows you to sculpt, like to come and go, right? That's so important in terms of getting that depth and variety and emotional rise and fall, and inserting who you are as a person into it. You're not a boring person. Most people don't sit around and talk it flat with a monotone voice.
Some do.
Some do. I know that. I've known Toastmasters. That was one of my things that I did classes on, was the power of your voice and how you can use it. And that's the same thing. You want to talk with expression, and with expression, you are not always talking at the same level. Sometimes you might be playing really against a backtrack that's loud, and sometimes the most effective thing is to drop off, have that pause, and then come back in, instead of competing with it all the time.
Yeah.
So
having a nice, lovely conversation with a flute, like you do a friend, because otherwise, in a conversation where somebody keeps going, and they're intense or they're very ponderous, I know I glaze over. And the same will happen if somebody is listening to your flute and it's always intense. It's like being nagged at or something.
Oh, I know. I have a good friend who does amazing work in the world with healing nature kind of stuff. She does amazing things. She's been playing flutes for a long time, and she came over to buy another flute for me when we were on the island, and she's playing, and I was giving her some tips, and she's like, I want to play like you. And so I said, okay, play. And she played, and then I played, and she said, that's what I want to learn that. I said, you need to stop being full force with your breath into your flute. Okay, it is the journey. It's up the hill, it's down the hill. You're walking in the park, you see the dog bark, you stop, you take a moment, the butterfly goes by. Like these are what playing the flute experience is about. You see the child crying. Okay, so you play something happy because you want to see if you can connect to the kids. We do that all the time. I know you do it too when you're selling your flutes at markets. Little kids go by crying, you play the flute. The kids are always right, like right with the sound. They love the sound. Yeah. So you try and create those moments, that sense of presence, and you can't do that if you're not having those pauses. So I often say to people, play in phrases, like, and think phrases. My song Coming Home, for example, I have this beautiful song Coming Home, and there's some interesting stories about that particular song. But when we were writing when I was creating Coming Home, the guitar player put this riff down and I came up with a little thing and I thought the words to this are, I don't know. I know where you're going. I don't know where you're going, but I know where you've been. And so that's the rhythm that I play to, is that phrase came into my head and that became part of the playing. And so I am often speaking in my head when I'm playing something, especially if I'm doing something that has a healing intention for someone. You know, they want you to play something that's got a healing intention. It's about being surrounded by love and light and allowing all that needs to happen. And I'm saying that as I'm playing. But I'll tell you the story about Coming Home, because it's a story about the magic element of the flute. Like I firmly believe that these flutes are calling people to come together in peace and harmony. But I think that there's much more. Like, I'm writing a book called The Call of the Flutes about my experiences as flute seller. Okay, so this is, and a person who connects people to the flutes. And this story started with a friend of mine who is First Nations up in Chemainus. This is when I was still living on Vancouver Island. She said, I want to do something for my daughter. Her birthday is June 21st. She lives in Seattle and I want her to come back home. You know, I really want her to come back home. And I said, June 21st is Aboriginal Days, or whatever they call it now, Indigenous Days in Canada. And I said, well, you live in Chemainus, they've got this beautiful water wheel park. Why don't you do something for Aboriginal Days? And you know, we can do some other things and I'll come and play the flute. And she said, oh, great. So she went off on this, got it all organized and did all this stuff. And we got this beautiful event going on. And I got a flute booth and I'm going to play the flutes. And she comes for me to perform. And she completely forgotten the whole purpose of this event. So I said to the audience that today is Val's daughter's birthday. And so I want you to join in sending some very, very powerful thoughts to Val's daughter for her birthday. I didn't even know her name, because this is an important day. This is how this whole event got started. Told them that story. So then I said, I'm going to play this song, Coming Home. Okay. And I'm sending this to Val's daughter. So we played Coming Home. It's a beautiful song. And 3 weeks later, Val sent me a Facebook message saying she came home. And I just like, oh my God, tears coming down my eyes, because the power of the intention and the beauty and all of those people together sending that energy, you know, things were probably in motion, but it's an amazing story.
That is an amazing story. And I got another amazing story. I was watching a video one day and there was this lady standing on a porch and she got the flute. And there's this guy with a beard and a handkerchief on his hat. Unlikely looking matchup. And they didn't know each other. And they started playing together in an improv. And I was like, who is this? And I played that video over and over again. And that was my first sighting of Terry Mack. And something about that still captures me. I still watch it. I make all my students watch that video because of the joyous improv that just happened beautifully on the spot. You didn't even know him.
No, we didn't
know you either. And all of a sudden I see you and it's like, I wrote your name down.
I know, and that's such an amazing story. And then you said something and then I contacted you. That's how that flute connected us. Flutes connect people. Oh.
You were interested in my destination fluting and I was interested in how did you do that? And the funny thing was, you're playing with all the grace and you're really jiving away on it. And then I don't know if it was a bumblebee or what not, but you didn't miss a trick, a note or anything while you're shooing this pesky.
It was a mosquito.
Mosquito this big because you're in Canada. And you were able to do two things at once. And I'm like, you know, you have to keep, the show goes on. And you were able to keep playing and, you know, get this mosquito away and play with him. And that was beautiful.
Well, that's this great joy of playing the flute, when you let yourself start to connect to the sound and the rhythm. And rhythm for some people is much harder. And so one of the things that's fun to rhythm, like often people try and play to backtracks that are way too complicated. And unless you've got some real musical sensibility or a good sense of rhythm, playing to overdubbed or overlayered backtracks is really, really hard. So another tip I'm going to give to people is that instead of playing to backtracks, play to different drum beats with different rhythms. And there's even a really good I can't remember where it is. I've got it. I've got a track of like 60 beats per minute, 80 beats per minute, 100 beats per minute. And I use that with my students to say, let's, there's all the technical terminology about, quarter notes and whole notes and all of that kind of stuff. And I don't work with that. I work with understanding this organic process of connecting to the sound. And so I will say, let's take a look at 60 beats per minute. How many notes do you think you can fit in? And how do you fit them in? Can you play long notes? Can you play short notes? Can you play one whole note and hold it for 3 or 4 of those beats? Like, what are the variations that you can do playing to that particular rhythm? And then you would go to an increased rhythm and then an increased rhythm. And it's interesting because you might find that one rhythm is much easier for you to connect to than others in terms of how you are working with your notes, and how you're staging it. But I guess if we're looking for tips, that's another tip, is to, when you're playing with a backtrack or with somebody else, you never want to compete with them. And this is what people get into too much. They're competing with each other instead of, and we go back to that space, right? Allowing the space, allowing that conversation to happen. So I always ask people to say, am I playing with that sound? Am I playing over that sound? Am I playing under or above that sound? Am I playing in between? So those are the things that you say, how am I going to fit what I'm doing in with it, so that you've got, again, I'm going back to sculpting and shaping, so that you're on that journey together. You're having that conversation with that piece of music and it starts to gel. And it might take you might have to sit there for 10 or 15 minutes to find your rhythm with it. But once you've got that, you don't lose that. That stays with you. That's how you develop this ability to flow with the sound.
Yeah. And I do the drumming too, and I have pretty good rhythm. I'm confident in that. I don't have the ear you have. Oh my heavens, I wish. And my husband's got a beautiful ear, can pick up a tune and play it, can think of it in his head and it will come out. I have to work hard on that, but I've got the rhythm. And I started out my playing with the drum beats, the 60 beats, and then up and so forth. And then I tried playing with songs I know. Well, darn me, I start wanting to be, Jimi Hendrix or whoever I'm listening to, and I want to play every note and every song. The competing that you talk about, and it got very hard. And you know what I've just come across recently is I'm using my looper and I'm creating the rain or horses' hoof falls or various things that are part of my life. And then I can sit down, because if I don't have something, sometimes I'll noodle off a cliff. But I'm now making these my own backing tracks of my own sounds of my life. And I can drop into that or the drums very easily. But if I listen to a song other than, say, Pink Floyd, which is so spacey, I can follow that without competing. But people do compete with the backing tracks, and you hear that, and you hear it in your students too. That is super, super one.
Yeah, because it's really important. You can't compete. I had one session with a group. I was running classes on the island, and I had a bunch of people together, and I did this exercise with people, and it was quite funny because the fellow fancied himself as a really fantastic player. Now, he is a very, very good player, but at that point he wasn't playing with music. He was himself fine. But we put this thing on and had people play together. I had them doing duets together back and forth. And some, they had to solo and they had to duet and they had to solo. And neither of them were in sync in any capacity, but they were having an absolute blast. And I put it to the rest of the class, did that work? And they all went, no. Because if it had come from me, he wouldn't have liked it. But no, it went to the rest of the class and they said no. And from there, he changed how he approached playing because he heard it from his peers.
Yes.
In a positive way. There was nothing negative about it. It was just, did that work? And what do you need to do to improve that? It's like too many notes. You're trying to fit all these notes in to this space that really might only need 3 or 4, a little rest, and then move into it. So that's one of the things that I think is really important about how you approach your playing.
And the other thing that you've helped all of us, because as I said, you're an honorary Willow Winder, because your teachings, thank you, your teachings, your videos, I call you or Zoom you with questions, and how would you do this, and this is going on, that kind of thing, and we adore you, and we take the honorary Willow Winder seriously, and we take you very seriously in our hearts. And we love duets, and I would love if you could reiterate some of your tips about playing a duet, because that's another thing, like a backing track, that people have these lanes they get into and they don't always mesh. And you've got great tips on that.
Yeah, we did that once. Remember, I was
Yep.
telling you about that. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, we've made it a study in our class.
yeah. The simplest thing for people for playing duets is often just to go from the top, play the top notes to the bottom notes, and then you get a conversation going back and forth. When you do this often enough, like if you spent this, you start with somebody and you're just going back and forth and you let yourself listen, depending on your skill level, eventually you get to the point where you can be playing more of the harmonies together. Like you will grow into that, but it just takes letting yourself flow with it. But I'll tell you a story of, again, one of my students who had gone and was taking a class with one of the very high profile instructors who is more technical and theoretical in terms of his approach. And he was trying to get people to play duets together. And she took this technique where we just went top and bottom and let the flow, just back and forth, start with the call and the response, and then let it grow into how you're playing. And it sounded really nice. And he was quite amazed by it. And he said, wow, how, people were saying, well, how did you do that? And she said, it's simplicity. Okay. You try and keep things simple. So by going from somebody's playing on the top notes, and you can, when you're playing in the pentatonic minor scale and you're playing top notes to bottom notes, you will very seldom get sounds that don't work well together. Okay. It's more about the rhythm and the pacing, but that's why that particular technique makes it easy for people to play duets, because eventually you will start to gel where you get some of those harmonies going on. But just keep it as simple as possible and listen. That is one of the absolute most important things about playing any instrument. And the flutes have taught me more about listening than anything in my entire life. Okay. I have to listen to my body. Am I comfortable? I have to listen to my breath. You listen to the space around you. Go talk to the corners, and see what kind of reverb or sound you're getting back. And often when I sell flutes, when people want to hear the sound, if they can't hear it, I'll send them to a wall and say, listen to the sound coming back to you, because you'll hear it better. When it's going in front of you, you don't hear it as much. But when you're in a room, and the corners are particularly good because then the sound is coming back to you, you get a better sense of what the sound is about. So it's the listening that is as much a part of playing as the playing.
Yes, yes. And I can, when I know you well enough now that when I watch you play, I can see you listen. I can feel it, and I actually start listening to where you're going in a different way than just listening to music go by and enjoy it. I actually can see where I'm starting to understand you that way. And when you really focus in on those notes that just send me, I love them. And
well, I had the interesting experience of because I mean, I never took any lessons. My first lesson was with Clint Goss at the first Flute Quest in 2006. And I was playing for, about 8 months. And I went in and I said, well, I'm a beginner. I just got it started. I don't know anything about this. And everybody's playing. And Clint around at the end of the workshop came up to me and said, you've never been a beginner.
Well, that's amazing high praise.
but at the other one, like I was running around like crazy going to flute events because there was nothing happening in Canada. Like I'm one of the people that had started making the flute more popular in Canada, but there weren't teachers, there wasn't anybody around. So thank God for the internet, because you could find and connect to people. But I was going to flute events, and I went to one flute event. There's two things that happened. There were two different flute events. I went to one flute event, and the instructor, I sat down and he said, oh, you're one of those people who like to make songs. As if it was some kind of a insult or something, or some kind of not an important part of the journey. And I'm thinking, yeah, I like to make songs. I make really pretty songs. I make songs that people like. What's wrong with that? There's different ways of playing. I do happen to have a gift of shaping songs, and making them flow for people. So that set me back. I went, oh, okay, that's like, I'm paying this guy and he insulted me. So I had to sit back and say, everybody finds their way into their own music. And you need to be able to accept and honor that. And then the next thing that happens is another guy said to me, well, why are you here? You can already play. And it's and the question that I often get as an instructor, and I use this instructor or this question, and this is why I wrote an article called "Questions to Ask Your Flute Instructor."
Good article.
Yeah, was I don't know what I don't know. You might know what I don't know, and I need you to help me find that. And so that clarity is how I approach my students. I need to know what it is that you think you want. I can help you, but if it's not the direction that you want to go. And so this is what you need to know with your flute instructors. Are they going to help you go in the direction that you want to go? And sometimes you might be doing things that you don't like because it will take you in the direction. But so,
you know, the one thing I like trying to get all my guests here and on my speaker programs and the other programs to say, and you know, that's one of the things we have in common. We both built a community around us with flute. So high five to you too, Terry. I mean, we've had a good time doing it too. I mean, I think it makes it more personal and really brings it home and brings people into our programs, yours and mine, is that we really care about it.
yeah.
I'm not saying anybody else doesn't, but if there's nothing around and you've got to build it from scratch, you could just sit there and go, oh my gosh, look at this. And it's not about you and I, it's look at what the flute has done for these people, all of us.
Absolutely. It builds connections. And I have so many, you probably have stories too, Helen, about people coming, like I had one in Port Place Mall in Nanaimo, which was this kind of considered by the higher end people living in North Nanaimo to be kind of a low life type of place. But it's on First Nations land, and it was a very vibrant mall before they decimated it and made it a strip mall. And it was a really interesting place to be because there were all kinds of people. It was a ferry ferry stop over to Gabriel Island, which is a very interesting island, a unique bunch of people. So it was a fascinating place to spend time. And I would rent space in there to sell the flutes. And so one day I have this woman frantically show up at my booth going, oh my God, now I know I'm supposed to be here. I hate this mall. I think it's like the low life of Nanaimo hanging around this mall. I'm thinking, who are you talking to, lady? But and she was going on and on about how she had this message for 2 days to go to Port Place Mall, and she just resisted it. And there was no way she was going to Port Place Mall until it wouldn't shut up. And so she showed up in Port Place Mall, and there I was selling flutes, and she'd wanted a flute for 2 years, like story after story after story about that. So these flutes do call and connect people, you know, and you can see it when you're playing, whether you're performing or whether you're selling your flutes and you're just noodling around, you can hear, I can really see the person who is called to the flute, because it's like the magnet, they come, you know, you're like the Pied Piper. It's so fun.
It is so fun. And one thing I like everybody to touch on, and over and over, whether it's on this program, any program, is the importance of just pulling out your cell phone. You can point it at the ceiling, point it at a tree. You don't have to point it at yourself, and record. You can erase it, but listen to what the flute is saying to you. And I know you believe in doing that too. Can you touch on that some more, of what people get out of that? Because they already know what I think.
Oh, well, you know, that's how I started to remember my songs. It was by having before cell phones had the recorders, I had a mini little portable recorder, tiny little thing like this big, really sweet, has 200 songs on it, or 200 variations of songs, because every time I wanted to catch something, I wanted to remember it. So I rely very much on my musical memory. And so that's the benefit of recording that. You capture that moment and you can go back. And often I will say, this is my E minor flute, and I started with my finger in the 4th position. Because if you can't hear that yourself and you're not very good at figuring it out, that's a very good way of knowing what you did when you had that starting moment. But the other beautiful thing is then you got those snippets, and you can go back to them and say, this is a piece I could develop. Okay, so that's what's fun when you're stuck and you've got your cell phone full of 30 pieces that you were fooling around with. You can go back and listen to them, and you can realize how far you've come with your playing.
That's one thing you really instilled in me, and I've instilled in my students, and that is to record a song, wait some period of time, weeks, or whatever it is for you that works, and listen to it again. And that has been invaluable for me. And you even picked out a song for me, and it changed everything for me in an instant because I was connected to the song Summertime. I
Mhm.
had your E flute to play it on. I had a tendency to play too fast. And I had a sister-in-law who was a vocalist, beautiful, not just because she's my sister-in-law, she's acclaimed at. And I just picked it up, and she's my late sister-in-law, and I dove into that, sending it to her as a message. So the whole thing became personal all the way around, like a big hug. And you know, and I know because I've sent it to you, that will always be my favorite rendition because I was so in the moment. I mean, it was raw, wonderful, warm type thing. And since then, though, I've been trying to take it, like you said, over a period of time and adjusting it, coming here from there. What mood am I in? And it actually is a fun kind of study, too. It's not just work.
Yeah.
And
Well,
seeing it grow and change.
this is what learning anything should be. Yeah, there are elements of hard work in it, but if the joy isn't part of that,
Yeah.
then you will stop.
Mhm.
With that horrible musical education experience I had, this is where my focus on people, that I call the people the musically wounded, is the people who have, for whatever reason, allowed the world to tell you that you shouldn't make music or you shouldn't make art or whatever. And you're not going to be the best at everything. Nobody can be the best at everything, but you can enjoy your journey with the sound. And so if your goal at the end of it is to play desperado, and you learn the sounds of the flute, you can learn to play desperado.
Yeah.
Or I play the Rose, or what, any song, okay, John Denver song. I play any song, and it's just my rendition. I listen to it, and then I sit down and I figure it out and I play it. And I had a student who really, really wanted to play any song, and she was trying like the tablature and all the kind of stuff. So she kind of got that part, and there was this moment where she got it. Okay, she got it, and she had the rhythm, and she had the flow. Wasn't outstanding playing, but it was super because she got it. And from there she could move on, because all of a sudden, your eyes light up and you feel the whole thing with your whole body about, I did that. And then you can move on.
And the thing is, as teachers, anybody, even if you're not a teacher doing it for a living, but you're teaching your child or a friend how to do it because you're sitting around the campfire, you hand them something, whether it's a flute or anything else, and all of a sudden you see that moment of brilliance that they're feeling, and you remember that in you too, and you get to share it. There are no words needed. It's just like, wow,
Yeah.
it's awesome.
I know another time we had the experience, because I used to run flute circles. I was running them all over the island and trying to get people to get together. And I didn't have your brilliance with destination fluting, but I was getting people together in these different areas, like 2-hour drive to go to Comox and set up a flute circle. And my husband would come along, and we had this one of those moments. It was so cool because we were trying to do the duets, the playing things, and this flute maker, Jamie Woodland, who makes beautiful flutes but doesn't make them anymore. Garland and him, I put on a backtrack, and they got into it. And the moment that they were in sync, you could see it, like the energy just shifts. And they were in sync, and they were playing, and they were joyful, and it was like, oh my gosh. And that's because we've gotten out of here.
Yeah.
Okay, because you can't play from here all the time. You need to be I kind of call it full body playing. You need to be connected to everything, your breath, your heart, your rhythm. And I move.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
When I play.
now I'm going to tell, I haven't mentioned this before, but I'm going to ask you, and I think this is a question I might start asking everybody at the end of the program, and as we start to wrap it up. I remember what my first song was on the flute, and I think it's really very telling and very funny, because I come from a horsey background, but also because of the musicality of my startup. And the song I played was The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
That's cool.
And I loved it. And it explains so much because it's all in there. And I've always loved that song. And there's a man who plays it on a big I should post that somewhere on one of my private flute sites for my students. And it's what he does with that song is just Amazing. So do you recall what your first quote song was that you tried to play to?
To trying to play to. So
Not one of your songs, but some song that inspired you at the beginning. You thought, oh, I'm going to play this.
um, probably not, because I don't. When I started playing the flute, I decided I would not listen to other people's music. That I wanted it to always be my own music.
Mm-hmm.
But I did have a moment where somebody asked me to play an Everly Brothers song, and I played it. It was just like, but because I could do that, that wasn't my focus for me. Okay, so if I can backtrack to that and say the first song that I ever made that sounded like a song was my song Sundance. And it was, you know, because I have 2 CDs, I've got music. I never thought in a million years that I had to have music and TV and movies and all that kind of stuff. And I do have some. But the song Sundance was just this joyful thing. And I stumble fingered my way through it, developing it. And I use it to show people what happens. You will let yourself stumble finger through and get it going. And it grew into this piece that has rhythm and flow, and it's joyful. And it was that moment for me, with that I made a song. I made a real song, a really pretty song.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was satisfied with the good, the bad, and the ugly. 1, because I'm a horseman, and 2, I love Clint Eastwood, and 3, it was something people could actually go, oh, she did play something. I think that all had a part of it for me, because I don't have the musical ear that you do, Terry. And I thank you for sharing your journey and how you sculpt your music, because we're all individual players. And that's true. We're all different, but you know, I adore your playing, especially you and Kurt. And I hope someday that you two do that again sometime, and I get to witness it live or on rewind. I don't care.
Mhm.
So I really thank you for coming, Terry. I really appreciate this. And we didn't go on as long as we have on our regular chats, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, it was a great joy for me to be part of this. It's also a great joy for me to be part of the Willow Winder. It's an honorary Willow Winder, and to just to be able to connect with good people like yourself, Helen, who are doing wonderful things with the flute community. I respect you, and I honor you for what you do.
Well, thank you. And you know, the same goes back to you. And we certainly have a good time. And I'm looking forward to having you as the guest speaker, and also on my new concert series that I'm going to bring up. And I will talk to you about that in private, but I'm putting you on the spot now as you're in the lineup.
Oh boy, I like that.
Another idea. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on Flute Topics, and I hope to see you next time. And until then, happy fluting, everybody. Bye-bye.